Back to our top story of the day, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on his way out. After resigning as leader of the Conservative Party, he will stay as Prime Minister until they elect a new leader. Roland Henwood is a lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria. Roland, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. Boris Johnson cut a defiant figure 24 hours ago. He gave the strong impression that he would never leave office. What do you think changed overnight?
Good afternoon, Stephen. What changed overnight is that the support he thought he had in Cabinet especially just evaporated, and he was left this morning with virtually no one to support him and had no choice but to announce his resignation.
What this really suggests is that the resignation of the two senior Cabinet Ministers this week that sort of started all of this, they knew exactly what they were doing.
Definitely so, and my sense is that they did not resign out of the blue. There definitely were discussions and plans to increase the pressure. The impression one gets is that they tried to do it in a way that will not damage the party, but in the end it had to be something that was forced onto Prime Minister Johnson, and he just refused to budge. He did not see reason. He had all sorts of arguments using the electoral triumph that he basically achieved in the 2019 election, the huge majority in relative terms for the Conservative Party, and try and use that as a buffer. But none of that actually could sway the party members and members of parliament specifically to continue supporting him.
What's so interesting is how quickly all of this happened, and as often a political death, a resignation is slowly and then quickly. And the point I'm trying to make is there's been so much scandal, and so many people supported him for such a long time, but then suddenly they all turned on him within a matter of 48 hours.
Yes, I think what one learns there again is that you can go so far and no further. And I think that is what happened. He just had too many of these scandals, and his attitude, his defiant attitude, often trying to intimidate people into not going against him. He was a very harsh politician. He was a shrewd politician, but quite harsh. He took no prisoners, and I think in the end that cost him dearly.
I mean, he is the kind of person who's been able to bounce back from so much. I mean, things that would have sunk a normal politician, he was able to come back from. But I don't know how people are going to remember him. I think they're going to remember his time in office, maybe for Brexit, but also for scandal. Is this the end of him?
Definitely. I think if one looks at his political career, you probably look at two eras. The one is Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, which was probably the high point that cemented his image and his approach. Since joining Parliament, becoming a Cabinet Minister and Prime Minister, it's a bit different. Scandal, bluster, and in the end it was just too much. He did not trade on loyalty, it seems, and he did not receive much loyalty in the end. And then, yes, he brought Brexit, but he brought a lot of problems with that, and his leaving government definitely not on a high.
There's sort of short-term implications and long-term implications of all of this. Let's start with the short-term and in the international relations arena, where Britain and the US have sort of played leading roles in helping Ukraine resist the Russian invasion. Is this going to affect that?
Not really. I think if one looks at the UK in terms of changes in leadership, there's a lot of continuity. Even if it's an opposition party that takes control, you see changes over time. It's not radical change. There's a lot of continuity. The bureaucracy quite important, and that keeps the system going amidst all the politicking and the changes in leaders. And that's going to continue. The relationship with the US is going to continue regardless of who becomes the new leader. It's possible that it would be one of the insiders that was, in other words, part of the Johnson cabinet, and that would also ensure a level of continuity. Yes, there may be some differences in style, most definitely, but that may be positive in that it may be easier to develop the kind of personal relationships that you require at the top level. Wasn't that easy with Boris Johnson in office.
There's perhaps a lesson that the interests of Britain and the US haven't changed just because the Prime Minister changes. Their interests are still to oppose Russia.
It's definitely so. No, the person is not going to change that. These are long-term relations, long-term values, and long-term political objectives. And that is going to remain. I think what would be interesting to see is if there will be a change in tack in terms of engagement with Europe, and that probably is going to be required. The Johnson approach did not work. Yes, he got Brexit, but he alienated many people on the continent especially and made life difficult, I think, for everyone. So that is something that will probably change and in a different direction.
There are a couple of longer-term issues now, and Boris Johnson, to my mind at least, is part of a trend around identity politics, and you can link Donald Trump, you can link Brexit, you can link the politics in the Philippines, you can link politics in Brazil, Bolsonaro. Some people would even go as far as linking politics in India. I don't know how far I'd go down that road. The point I'm trying to make is Boris Johnson being essentially evicted from power. Is this a significant moment to suggesting the end of that kind of politics in Britain, or not really?
I'm not sure. One would have to see how it plays out. I think what one sees firstly is the rejection of Boris Johnson and his style of politics, but that's very personal. If that is going to have a bigger impact and a wider range of issues, it is likely. But one would have to see. I think that's going to depend on the individual that's going to take over. Likely to be somebody with a very different approach and style, and that may change the dynamics and the kind of politics. I think it's been quite clear for a while that Brits are rejecting Johnson and his brand of politics. Not the Conservative Party necessarily, but definitely Johnson, and that had a knock-on effect on the party. So if you don't make the changes now, when the next election comes around, Conservative Party is to pay a very dear price for what they've allowed to happen up to now.
You made the point that the Conservative Party won a very big mandate in the last election in that country in 2019. One of the reasons for that was that the leader of the opposition Labour Party, a man called Jeremy Corbyn, was very unpopular with voters. That's all changed. There's another person called Keir Starmer, who used to, in fact, be their Director of Public Prosecutions. So it's, in a way, sort of the equivalent of Shamila Batohi leading an opposition political party. It's quite an interesting development. Is this all going to sort of reset their politics? Is the Labour Party becoming more competitive, which may also be one of the reasons why the Conservative Party has got rid of Boris Johnson?
Yes, maybe, but I think there's an interesting dynamic playing out. If we look at the last couple of by-elections that happened, the Conservative Party actually notched up some considerable losses in very safe Conservative seats, but not Labour necessarily. The party that seems to have a new lease on life because of the politics of Boris Johnson is the Liberal Party. So there's an interesting different dynamic that seems to be developing. It may be that since Johnson leaves, the Labour may actually start operating differently. So Starmer will definitely be relieved. And he was the victim of a very vicious smear campaign that was also driven by Johnson. It was very unfair and it was quite vicious. So that may also change now. But the Labour Party is not necessarily where they want to be at. Liberal seems to be right on the wave more than the other parties.
Roland Henwood, thank you. I do appreciate it. Lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria.